Hello there, lovely people. It's Alex from Nintendo Live here, and today we're reviewing for you RollerCoaster Tycoon Classic on the Nintendo Switch. This review was originally written by me, and I've been playing the game for 25 years, so I suppose it's only appropriate. But anyway, that's more than enough waffling. Let's dive right into things. The king of theme park management sims is here. It's not some god-awful spin-off that bears the name but none of the fun. It's not the great but not as good as the first two RollerCoaster Tycoon 3. This is the first and second games in the series, stitched together and bundled with some modern quality of life features like speeding up time. My word, this is a godsend. This is RollerCoaster Tycoon Classic on Switch, and expectations are lofty. If you're unfamiliar with the premise, you're given a plot of land or an existing theme park and a goal to reach. It might be housing a certain number of guests, achieving a high park value, or perhaps even paying off a debt that someone incurred by not charging for anything. The way to do any of these is largely the same. Create a big, elaborate, exciting, and profitable theme park filled with free-fall launchers, merry-go-rounds, refreshment stalls, and of course, roller coasters. Despite its vintage, RollerCoaster Tycoon Classic absolutely slaughters the competition with its flexibility, simple yet powerful design controls, visuals that, whilst technically dated, look stunning, and bags of charm. The game comes with a whopping 95 scenarios for you to tackle, and that doesn't even include the 43 quote-unquote extra parks that you can find in the menu selection of the same name. These are all but a handful of the scenarios from RollerCoaster Tycoon and its immediate sequel, plus all of the expansion packs that were released for them over 20 years ago. The only omissions from the originals are some of the real parks that we're assuming developer Chris Sawyer and publisher Atari weren't able or willing to renew the rights to. Alton Towers was never our favourite, so we can live without it. The scenarios are as strong and varied as they ever were, but this souped-up version includes some small changes, such as additional scenery in previously barren parks, mostly thanks to the, at the time, new additions from RollerCoaster Tycoon 2. Also from that sequel is the Designer, a workspace that allows you to create your own custom rollercoaster designs, free of the stresses and finances of a scenario, and with the ability to save your rides so you can plop them into the real game whenever you flippin' fancy. You can also save your designs midway through a scenario, don't worry. Unlike other versions of the game though, the scenario side of the toolkit is missing, meaning you can't create custom parks or indeed share them with your friends, which is a bit of a blow. This could be a result of the .sc6 file import and export system not aligning with Nintendo's lockdown approach to their console, but it would have been nice to see it in some form even stripped back rather than being entirely gutted. So, it's all largely what you'd expect, except that the UI has had a total overhaul from the 90s and 2000s originals, and this is where we get into the weeds of the Switch version specifically. Visually, things are different. That much is immediately obvious, but changing the controls from mouse to keyboard to a twin-stick layout is never a straightforward task. As it happens, the porting team at Graphite Lab have put some serious thought into how the Switch version handles. You will be moving a cursor around with the left stick, which may initially sound like a solution that doesn't fall in line with what we literally just said, but the reality is that there's no elegant way to get around the fact that the whole game was designed with a cursor in mind, and stripping that away would only diminish things or remove flexibility. Well, having said that, there is one other control method that would work, but we'll get onto that later. Various mode switches and shortcut keys make the whole experience a lot smoother than it could be, jumping between the different path tiles and track pieces, rotating what needs rotating. You can do it all and more without ever having to rely on the in-game cursor more than once or twice. It's just buttons. It does take a little bit of getting used to, and all of these shortcuts and extra controls are somewhat hidden in the options menu, but once you've got them down, it might be one of the most comfortable ways we've ever built custom roller coasters to date. Having said that, there are still some small nuisances with the controls. The map, for example, is in the top right-hand corner and has no shortcut associated with it as far as we can tell, despite inputs such as clicking the right stick going unused. Instead, you have to drag the in-game cursor slowly up to the appropriate corner, and there's no adjustment for how quickly it moves. Don't get us wrong, as far as moving a cursor with the left stick goes, it is dead smooth, and we're not sure we've ever misselected something that wouldn't be just as tricky with a real mouse, but some flexibility in the options to change how fast it moves, that would have been nice. The game also runs rather well. provided you don't zoom out at all. For some reason, at the standard zoom level, the game runs perfectly acceptably. I mean, it drops frames in busier scenes, but given the nature of the game, it's never something that really affected enjoyment. Zoom out, on the other hand, and suddenly the game starts to really struggle, and panning the camera only makes things worse. Given that the original games could run on a machine about as powerful as a wet flannel, it's disappointing to see the frame rate take such a dive in these instances. You don't even need to be in a busy park. The initial Forest Frontier scenario with nothing added is choppy as all hell when panning around and zoomed out. What's even more bizarre is that our console didn't seem to be struggling in a similar manner. The fan remained whisper quiet throughout. It's very unclear why the performance tanks quite so much, but in truth, you're not likely to be spending much time at anything other than the default zoom level. Whilst it doesn't really affect gameplay in any significant sense, it is still disappointing to see such an old game getting frame rates in the single digits in certain extreme instances. Another strange omission is that RollerCoaster Tycoon Classic doesn't support touch controls on Switch. Given that the original release of this version back in 2016 was exclusive to smart devices, we're frankly agog that this functionality hasn't made its way to Nintendo's touchscreen-toting hybrid. It's not a deal-breaker by any means, and the quick, sleek controller inputs make for a seriously pleasant time on the big screen, but the touchscreen is right there in handheld mode, and with an interface designed with touch controls in mind, it's baffling that such a function is not present on Switch. We'd really like to see these issues addressed in a future update, but if we're being brutally honest, once we were deep into Diamond Heights, upping the ride fee for arachnophobia and slapping together a custom looping coaster with an excitement rating of over 7 and making absolute bank off the hapless tiny guests we'd lured in, we stopped caring about those minor inconveniences completely. RollerCoaster Tycoon Classic maintains its crown as the lord of all theme park management sims. Despite not supporting touchscreen inputs at all for some bizarre reason, and sudden performance dips when zooming out, the move to Nintendo Switch is a great one. With smartly designed controls and that timeless RollerCoaster Tycoon gameplay loop completely intact, the best way to play this classic on your living room TV might, ironically, be Nintendo's handheld hybrid. You've reached the end of the review, and it would be time for Alex's personal thoughts, but I wrote this one, but I do have some extra points that I want to raise that didn't really feel like they fitted in the quote-unquote official review, and that's mostly OpenRCT 2. I really enjoy OpenRCT 2, but when I was playing the Switch version, I can't deny I started to forget all those lovely little extras that were put in, because the base games are still so great by themselves. Yes, in an ideal world, I'd like to be playing OpenRCT 2 rather than Classic, but hell, Classic is still a really, really excellent way to play these games. The biggest thing for me, it's the controls. Initially, when I first loaded it up and saw that I was moving a cursor around with the left stick, I was a bit like, oh god, really? But then when I got into it and doing all the custom ride building and stuff like that, it's easily the most enjoyable and comfiest way I've ever built custom rides. It is just so simple, and it breaks things down. For some reason, I just find it way more intuitive, even than the original control scheme. Like, it's baffling. I never would have thought that it would be better than a mouse and keyboard, but when it comes to building custom designs, it's, if not the same, then it is slightly better, for me. Just the fact that I can lean back on a sofa without, like, a mouse and keyboard on my lap because it's never comfortable, or, you know, like, I've played it on my Steam Deck and, you know, sort of tried to wrangle the controls to work, and they never work 100%. I'm always sort of, like, going in and tweaking little things here and there. This just works, and it's kind of lovely.